I walked into the Driscoll Hotel ballroom in downtown Austin for my son's engagement dinner when I heard her voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "Here comes the stinky country boy again," she shouted loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The words hit me like a physical blow. My face burned instantly, my hands went ice cold, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I wanted to turn around and disappear forever. But before I could take a single step, my son grabbed my arm and pulled me close. "Stay calm, Dad," Nathan whispered right in my ear, his voice low and steady as bedrock. "Tomorrow, everything changes. I'm so grateful you're here with me for this story. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, like button, and tell me, where are you listening to this right now? And what time of day is it where you are?" Because when I walked into that ballroom, I had no idea my entire life was about to change forever. Let me tell you who I am before this nightmare began. My name is Jesse Harlan, and I've spent 68 years on a ranch deep in the Texas Hill Country, building something real with these two weathered hands. The Harlan Ranch sits where the hills roll like green waves, and the vineyards stretch endlessly toward the horizon under the big Texas sky. This isn't just a cattle and grape operation. It is a legacy my father left me, carved out of dirt, sweat, and pure, stubborn determination. It's been a simple life centered around honest work, but it's the only life I've ever needed. I had 2 children of my own. My daughter Emily grew up and built her own life away from the ranch. But Nathan, my boy, he stayed close. He's 35 now, a talented agricultural engineer, successful in his field. Yet even though he moved to Austin for work, he comes back every chance he gets, rolls up his sleeves, and works right beside me in the vineyards and pastures. That bond between a father and son is built on more than blood. It is built on trust, earned one long day at a time. My wife Maria was the heart of everything for 34 years. She passed 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and it remains the hardest thing I've ever had to carry. You learn to live with that kind of loss, but you never stop feeling it. Then, a little over 2 years ago, Nathan met Lauren Whitaker. I remember that first dinner clearly. Nathan insisted on introducing her at our usual family steakhouse in Fredericksburg. His way of saying this one mattered. Lauren was beautiful, polished, the kind of elegant that comes from old money and East Coast cities. She wore it well and spoke with an ease that only comes from being raised in places like Boston or Manhattan. But something in my gut, that old rancher's instinct that has kept me alive and alert for 68 years, started nagging me from the very first handshake. The questions she asked seemed innocent enough. The way she tilted her head with interest, that practiced smile. But beneath every question was a cold calculation I could see as clearly as sunrise. "How many acres do you own exactly?" "Jesse, that must be worth quite a bit these days. Has Nathan mentioned what he might inherit one day? Do you have your will all set up? That's important at your age, isn't it?" She never asked what my son loved, never asked about his dreams or his passions. She only asked about property values, inheritance, and what would eventually pass from my hands to his. Then I met her father, Richard Whitaker. He carried himself like a man accustomed to winning, his smile thin as a razor blade. When he shook my hand, his grip had no warmth in it, just a brief contact before he pulled away. His eyes moved across me the way a buyer examines livestock, assessing, calculating, finding the value beneath the surface. Lauren's mother was worse, all practiced grace and frozen courtesy, her eyes sharp as broken glass behind a perfect veneer of charm. I pulled Nathan aside afterward and told him straight, "Son, Something doesn't feel right about this one. She's not asking about you. She's asking about money." He smiled that patient smile young men use when they think their fathers have lost touch with the modern world. "Dad, I love her. You're worrying over nothing." I let it go because I didn't want to be the father who drove a wedge between his son and his happiness. But that feeling never faded. That old instinct honed across 6 decades kept whispering warnings I couldn't quite put into words. If only I had trusted my gut louder back then. If only I had known what Lauren Whitaker and her family were really planning. The ballroom at the Driscoll gleamed with the kind of wealth that made my clean flannel shirt and polished boots look like relics from another century. Crystal chandeliers cast golden glow across the space, and servers in black suits drifted through the crowd with trays of champagne and appetizers I couldn't pronounce. Nathan had spared no expense for his engagement celebration, and I was genuinely proud of him for that. Proud that he had grown into a man who could command a room without ever raising his voice, but I wasn't happy. The moment we arrived, something felt different. Lauren seemed almost theatrical, laughing louder than necessary, her hand perpetually on some guest's arm. Her parents held court near the bar like royalty surveying their kingdom. Richard Whitaker wore a smirk that reminded me of a rattlesnake studying a field mouse. I stood near the edge of the crowd, nursing a bourbon, trying to figure out why I felt so uneasy. Emily found me there, squeezed my arm knowingly. She had never trusted Lauren either. We shared a look, the kind that happens between a daughter and her father. No words needed. That's when I heard it. Lauren's voice cut through the chatter like broken glass. She was speaking to her mother near the dessert table. Her words meant to be private but carried straight to my ears. "Here comes the dirty old rancher again," she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "I swear every time he appears the whole room smells like cattle and soil. How does Nathan even tolerate him?" The words landed like a physical blow. I felt my face flush, the bourbon glass suddenly heavy in my hand. Around me, several people went quiet. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their shoes. The insult wasn't just directed at me. It was performed for the entire room. A public announcement that she saw me as beneath her. An embarrassment to be endured. My chest tightened. First came the anger. Raw, primal anger at this woman who had played my son so perfectly. Anger that my warnings had been dismissed, that my instincts had been right all along but no one listened. I set down my glass with deliberate care and turned toward the exit. I couldn't stay in that room another second. I couldn't stand to watch her perform this fake engagement. Couldn't witness my son beside someone who mocked him and his family. But before I could take a step, a hand gripped my shoulder hard. It was Nathan. His face was calm, but his jaw was clenched tight, and his eyes burned with something I had rarely seen in my son. Cold certainty. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice steady as bedrock. "I need you to stay." I started to argue. "I can't." He cut me off. "You can, and you will." He leaned closer, his words barely above a whisper. "Because tomorrow everything changes. Lauren and her father think they've won. They think this engagement is real, that they're about to lock down everything they want. But they're wrong." I looked at my son, this man I had raised, who I had taught to work hard and speak truth, and I saw something in him that made me pause. Not a plan I understood, not an explanation I could follow, just absolute unwavering confidence. "Trust me," he said, and I did. For 68 years I had learned to read people, I had gambled on instinct before, and my gut had always guided me true. Standing there in that ballroom with Lauren's cruelty still ringing in my ears, I made a choice. I chose to believe in my son. The morning sun barely filtered through Nathan's apartment windows when I arrived. My body still carried the weight of last night. The humiliation, the anger, the uncertainty. I had spent the night in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling, replaying Lauren's words on an endless loop. When Nathan called, his voice sounded different. Not like my son asking for advice, but like a man with answers. "Dad," he had said simply, "come to my place. I need you to hear something." I expected him alone. Instead, when I walked in, a younger man I had never met sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, surrounded by headphones, cables, and professional recording gear. "Dad, this is Mason Reed," Nathan said, his hand on my shoulder. "He's a sound engineer. He's been helping me piece this together for weeks." Mason nodded respectfully but said nothing. He understood silence was required right now. Nathan took a deep breath. "For the past 6 weeks, before the engagement party, I've been recording Lauren and her father, their conversations, their plans." Nathan's voice stayed steady, but I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the laptop. "Dad, I need you to listen to something." He pressed play. Lauren's voice filled the room, crisp and clear through the speakers. "I married him for the land. Nothing else. Once we get the deed in Dad's name, we'll disappear, reinvest everything into our New York development projects, and never look back at this God-forsaken ranch." The words landed like shrapnel. My future daughter-in-law, the woman who had kissed my cheek at family dinners, who smiled in wedding planning photos, had just confessed to using my son as nothing more than a stepping stone to theft. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. Nathan moved to the next file without waiting. Richard Whitaker's voice came next, confident and calculating. "That land is worth $3 million right now, but the state approved the interstate expansion last quarter. In 3 years, that property will be worth $35 million, maybe more. Jesse Harlan has no idea what's sitting on his ranch." Lauren's voice again, harder this time. "That's why the marriage has to last 3 years minimum. I can't stand that filthy little town or that old man for one more second than I have to. But yes, it's worth it." I had to grip the table to stay upright. Nathan watched me carefully, giving me space to absorb the magnitude of what I was hearing. The deliberation, the greed, the calculated contempt. "There's more," Nathan said quietly. "A lot more. But you understand now." I looked at my son, really looked at him. This young man I had watched grow from a boy mending fences into someone capable of this kind of courage and patience. "Is this legal?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Mason spoke for the first time. "Completely legal. Texas is a one-party consent state." Nathan was part of every conversation. Nathan leaned forward. "Dad, I know this is a lot, but we have everything we need now. Proof of their intent to defraud you. Proof of conspiracy. Proof they're willing to use me to steal our legacy." "So what do we do?" I asked, part of me already knowing the answer. "We show them tomorrow." Nathan's jaw set firm. "We show everyone. At the wedding," he continued. "They'll stand before 200 people, and we'll reveal who they really are." I looked at the laptop screen filled with files, at the evidence my son had methodically gathered while I had been blind. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury mixed with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. I did not sleep that night. The hotel room felt too quiet, too still. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those recordings again. Lauren's cold confession, Richard's calculations about millions, the casual cruelty as they discussed dismantling everything I had built. At 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest. I sat in the darkness, staring out at the Austin skyline, and did something I hadn't done in years. I talked to Maria. "Maria," I whispered into the dark, "help me through this. Our son needs us now. He's trying to protect what we built together, and I'm terrified I'm going to fail him." I could almost hear her voice, steady and sure, the way it had always been in life. "You won't fail him. You're his father. He's your son. That's all that matters." Maria had always been the strong one in our marriage in a quiet way. While I managed the ranch with my hands, she had managed our family with her heart. She had known, somehow, that Nathan would become the kind of man who would not let injustice stand. She had raised him to be honest, to be brave, to stand up for what mattered. God, I missed her. As dawn broke over the Texas hills, I forced myself to get ready. I put on the suit Nathan had helped me pick out weeks earlier, back before any of this darkness surfaced. The fabric felt stiff and foreign on my body. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Not because of the suit, but because my eyes carried something they hadn't held in years, the weight of knowing something others didn't. In the bathroom, I locked the door and did something private. I knelt down, even though I'm not a particularly religious man, and I prayed. Not for safety or success. I wasn't naive enough for that. I prayed for clarity. I prayed that the truth would be undeniable. I prayed that my son would be protected, that justice would actually mean something. When I arrived at the venue that morning, the space was already buzzing with activity. Florists arranging white roses along the aisle, staff setting up champagne stations, everything pristine and perfect. A facade of celebration built on lies. And positioned discreetly behind the altar was a large screen. To any guest, it looked like a modern touch for showing photos during the ceremony, a romantic projection of the couple's love story. I knew better. In just a few hours, that screen would become the instrument of truth. Everything we had prepared, everything Nathan had sacrificed time and energy to orchestrate, would unfold from that moment forward. The real question wasn't whether we were ready. It was whether Lauren and her father had any idea what was coming. The ceremony began at noon. Lauren descended the aisle like she had stepped out of a fairy tale, all flowing white silk and calculated grace. Her father walked beside her, his hand proprietary on her arm, his smile that of a man who believed he had already won. The guests rose to their feet, and I watched the room fill with genuine smiles and genuine tears. They had no idea what was about to unfold. I sat in the front row, Emily beside me, her hand finding mine and squeezing gently. "Stay strong," that squeeze said. "It's time." Nathan stood at the altar in a tailored suit, his expression calm, his hands steady, the hands of a man who had made peace with what he was about to do. Next to the minister stood a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with sharp, observant eyes. I would learn later he was District Attorney Mark Ellison, but in that moment he was just another quiet witness. The minister began with the traditional words. The venue smelled of flowers and expensive perfume. Soft music played from hidden speakers. Everything was exactly what a wedding should be. Everything except the truth. "We gather here today," the minister intoned, "to witness the union of Nathan Harlan and Lauren Whitaker in the bonds of holy matrimony." Lauren's smile was radiant, confident, A woman who believed she was exactly where she needed to be, about to achieve exactly what she wanted. The minister continued with blessings, readings, and all the traditional elements designed to celebrate love and commitment. But every word felt hollow now that I knew the truth. Every gesture, every smile felt like pure performance. And then came the moment. "Nathan Harlan," the minister said, turning to my son. "Do you take this woman to be your wife, to have and to hold, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health? For as long as you both shall live," the room held its breath. This was the moment Lauren had been waiting for, the moment her parents had orchestrated, the moment when my son would say yes and everything would be legally sealed. Nathan took a slow breath. I watched his chest rise and fall. I watched him look directly at Lauren, and I saw something in his expression shift, a moment of genuine sadness, perhaps for the woman she had pretended to be. Then he turned to face the gathered crowd. "Before I answer," Nathan said, his voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the venue, "there is something everyone needs to see." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Lauren's face went pale as death. Richard Whittaker stood up from his seat, his expression transforming from confidence to alarm. "What are you doing?" Lauren hissed, but her voice was lost in the growing whispers. The minister looked bewildered. "I'm sorry." "What?" But Nathan wasn't looking at the minister anymore. He was looking at the screen behind the altar, the screen that had seemed so innocent just hours before. A light flickered. The screen came to life. My heart seized in my chest. The moment had come. Everything we had waited for, everything we had prepared for, was about to become real. I felt Emily's grip tighten on my hand so fiercely it almost hurt. Around me, guests leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. Richard Whittaker's face had gone from alarm to genuine panic. He grabbed Lauren's arm and began pulling her toward the exit, but the aisle was blocked by curious guests standing up. "Everyone needs to hear the truth about Lauren Whittaker and Richard Whittaker," Nathan announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "And it's all right here." The screen glowed brighter, waiting to reveal its contents. I realized I was holding my breath. The screen blazed to life. Lauren's voice filled the ballroom before anyone could process what was happening. Clear, unfiltered, devastating. "I married him for the land. Nothing else. Once we get control of the deed, we'll push him out and disappear. He'll never know what happened." The words hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating the celebration that had seemed so perfect moments before. For one heartbeat, the room went completely silent. Then it erupted. Guests who had been crying happy tears now gasped in unison. Some stood up immediately, their faces twisted in disgust. I heard someone near me whisper harshly, "Liar. Absolute liar." Another voice louder, "How could you?" Lauren's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could get a word out, the video continued. This was no edited snippet. This was clear, deliberate, unmistakable proof. Richard Whittaker appeared on the screen next to his daughter. "That land is worth $3 million right now," he said in his businessman tone, crisp and certain. "But the government approved the interstate expansion last quarter. In 3 years, that property will be worth $35 million, maybe more. Jesse Harlan has no idea what's sitting on his ranch." Lauren's voice again, harder this time. "That's why the marriage has to last at least 3 years. I can't stand that filthy little town or that old man for 1 second longer than necessary. But yes, it's worth it." The second wave of reaction was even more violent than the first. A woman near the back actually screamed. Several guests grabbed their phones and started recording, their expressions oscillating between horror and vindication. "She's a monster," someone spat. Lauren tried to push forward toward the screen, her white dress sweeping across the marble floor. "It's edited. It's fake. Someone manipulated it." But her words were drowned out by the murmuring crowd. Richard had gone from pale to actively panicked. He bolted from his seat, pushing past confused guests, clearly trying to reach the control panel for the screen. He never made it. Before he could get 10 feet, the projection locked down completely. Mason Reed had anticipated this exact moment. One keystroke and the screen was no longer responsive to any manual override. Richard's hand fell uselessly as he stared at the controls that no longer obeyed him. The third video played, Lauren's voice intimate and conspiratorial. "We'll convince Nathan to put his father in a nursing home somewhere far away. He'll never understand what happened. He'll just fade away thinking his son abandoned him." That's when I felt something shift inside me. Not shock anymore. I had already absorbed the betrayal when I heard these recordings in Nathan's apartment. But this was different. This was public humiliation. My family's secrets weaponized in front of 200 people. And yet, when I looked at my son standing calmly at the altar, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pride so fierce it almost hurt. A man stood up from the guest section. Tall, distinguished, his movement deliberate and authoritative. "I am District Attorney Mark Ellison," he announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "What I have just witnessed is conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, and grand theft. All parties involved are under arrest." The room froze. Police officers in uniform appeared from the side exits almost immediately. They had clearly been briefed and positioned in advance. They moved with the efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing. One officer approached Richard, who tried to run and was quickly restrained. Another moved toward Lauren, who had sunk to her knees, her white dress pooling around her like a collapsed dream. Lauren was sobbing now, her composed facade shattered completely. "This isn't fair," she kept repeating. "This isn't fair." But it was fair. It was more than fair. It was justice. Guests were now actively leaving, some shaking their heads in disgust, others lingering to watch the spectacle unfold. The ballroom, which had been filled with celebration just minutes before, had transformed into something else entirely. A crime scene, a courtroom, a monument to the consequences of greed and deception. As the officers led Richard and Lauren toward the exits, handcuffs glinting under the ballroom lights, I locked eyes with Nathan. He was still standing at the altar, perfectly composed, his expression carrying neither triumph nor satisfaction. Just clarity. The clarity of a man who had done what needed to be done. My son had protected our family. He had exposed the truth. He had delivered justice not through revenge, but through evidence, preparation, and courage. And now, as the woman he had almost married was being led out in handcuffs, as the man who plotted to steal my legacy was being read his rights, as 200 guests stood in stunned silence, I knew we were finally safe. 2 weeks later, I sat in the Travis County Courthouse, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for what I had waited for my entire life without knowing it. Vindication. The preliminary hearing had been brief. District Attorney Mark Ellison presented the evidence methodically. Audio recordings authenticated by experts proving without question that these were genuine conversations, not edited fabrications. Documents were analyzed, revealing forged signatures and falsified transfer papers. Bank records showed money being funneled from a development company straight into Richard Whittaker's accounts, with Lauren listed as beneficiary on draft proposals that were never meant to be legitimate. The judge had little choice. "Sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial," he stated, banging his gavel with finality. But the real reckoning came 4 months after that. The main trial was packed. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and the particular silence that only legal proceedings can create. Nathan and I both testified, recounting how we discovered the conspiracy, how Nathan had made the recordings, how the evidence had unfolded at the wedding. Our voices were steady throughout, but I noticed Nathan's hands trembled slightly when he described Lauren's confession about putting me in a nursing home. Mark Ellison was relentless in his presentation. He walked the jury through every piece of evidence like chapters of a book they could not ignore. The recordings were played again, clearer now with expert testimony confirming their authenticity. The documents were displayed with forensic analysis, showing the exact techniques used to forge my signature. The money transfers were traced with precision, revealing a pattern of financial manipulation that extended back years. Then something unexpected happened. A woman stood to testify. Grace Ellison. I recognized her name from the prosecutor's files, but I hadn't expected to see her in person. She was composed, dignified, and her story was chilling. "Lauren Whittaker and her father approached my fiancée 4 years ago," Grace said, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion beneath it. "They proposed the exact same scheme: fake marriage, transfer of his family property, then disappearance. My fiancé refused, but they were persistent. I'm grateful that what they attempted with Nathan Harlan finally exposed what they've been doing to others." The courtroom held its breath. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty, on every count. Richard Whittaker, conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, grand theft, 12 years in federal prison. Lauren Whittaker, conspiracy to commit fraud, accomplice to document forgery, grand theft, 10 years in federal prison. When the judge announced the sentences, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph exactly, but completion. A wound that had been bleeding for months suddenly began to close. I looked at Nathan sitting beside me and saw peace on his face for the first time since this nightmare began. The courtroom began to empty. People filtered out slowly, some shaking their heads at the audacity of the scheme, others speaking in hushed tones about the boldness of the execution and the precision of the evidence. Mark Ellison approached us, extending his hand to both Nathan and me. "You two did good work," he said simply. "Not many families would have had the courage to do what you did. To record, to document, to stand up publicly. Most people would have tried to handle it quietly, privately, but that would have let them continue the pattern." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, District Attorney Ellison, for believing us, for seeing this through." He nodded. The evidence was undeniable. Once I heard those recordings, there was no other path forward. As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright Texas sunlight, I turned to Nathan and really looked at him. My son, the man he had become, the protector of our family's legacy. "We did it," I said. "We did." He agreed. "Now comes the harder part." I looked at him, confused. "Harder? How could anything be harder than this?" Nathan smiled, and for the first time in months it was a genuine smile. "Figuring out what comes next, Dad. For all of us." 5 months after the verdict, Nathan came to me on a morning when the Texas sun was just beginning to paint the hills gold. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying a certainty I had learned to trust completely. "I'm not going back to the city. This is where I belong. With you. With the land." I wanted to tell him I already knew. A father recognizes these decisions in his son's eyes before words are ever spoken. But instead I simply nodded and clasped his shoulder, feeling something inside me settle into place. The months that followed were unlike anything I had experienced in years. Nathan threw himself into the work of the ranch with a focus that surprised even me. But more importantly, he wasn't alone. Grace Ellison, the woman whose testimony had helped seal the prosecution's case, began spending time at the ranch. What started as gratitude evolved into something deeper. I watched them together, talking over coffee on the porch, working side by side in the vineyard, laughing at some private joke. And I realized that sometimes justice doesn't just restore what was stolen. Sometimes it creates something entirely new. 7 months after that first conversation, they were married. It wasn't the elaborate affair Lauren had orchestrated. There was no crystal chandelier, no pretense, no hidden agendas masquerading as celebration. Instead, there was a simple ceremony under the old live oak tree that had stood on this land for over 100 years. Family and close friends. Words spoken with genuine meaning. A blessing that felt real because it was real. After the wedding, something magical happened. Nathan and I began working the ranch together in a way we hadn't since he was a teenager. He brought knowledge from his years away. Modern irrigation techniques, sustainable farming practices, equipment that made the work less backbreaking but no less meaningful. I brought knowledge accumulated over 6 decades, the rhythm of the seasons, the temperament of the animals, the secret language the land speaks to those patient enough to listen. We installed new water systems that turned struggling sections of vineyard into thriving rows of grapes. We modernized the cattle operations with technology that improved both efficiency and animal welfare. We worked side by side, father and son, restoring what we had almost lost. Emily visited one weekend and walked the property with wonder in her eyes. "It's beautiful." "Dad," she said, embracing both of us. "I was so scared we were going to lose this place." "We almost did," I said quietly. But then I looked at Nathan, at the land we had saved together, at the future taking root around us. But we didn't. The farmhouse was fuller than it had been in years. Grace brought warmth and laughter to rooms that had grown cold. Nathan brought purpose and vision. And I found myself at 68 feeling younger somehow. Not physically, but spiritually. The burden I had carried for so long had lifted. Late one evening, sitting on the porch with Nathan watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, I realized something had shifted fundamentally. We weren't just a father and son who had survived a threat to our legacy. We were a family that had been tested and emerged stronger. The land was healing. We were healing. And somewhere in that healing, we discovered something that couldn't be stolen, couldn't be forged, couldn't be manipulated. We had discovered each other again. Looking back now, I realize how close we came to losing everything. Not just the land, but the trust between father and son, the integrity of our family, the belief that truth still matters. I was 68 when Lauren called me a dirty old rancher. I had lived through droughts, recessions, losing my wife, and raising 2 children alone. But nothing prepared me for the realization that someone I had welcomed into my family had been plotting to destroy us from day one. What saved us was my son's courage to act on the truth. Nathan inherited my values and exceeded them. He took evidence and made it undeniable. He planned carefully. He exposed those who betrayed us. And when the moment came, he did not hesitate. Richard Whittaker once offered me $900,000 to settle quietly and keep the shame private. I refused because I learned something. You cannot negotiate with people who have decided you are expendable. You can only expose them and let justice do its work. 3 things I want to say clearly. First, if something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust that instinct. Second, family is everything. Protect it with absolute conviction. Nothing is more valuable than the people you love. Third, the truth doesn't hide forever. It surfaces. It transforms everything. Looking at my son now, at the family we have rebuilt, at the land thriving under our shared care, I know we made the right choice. We chose truth over silence. We chose family over convenience. And in the end, that choice saved us all. That's my story. That's the lesson. My name is Jesse Harlan. This is my true story. I'm sharing it because I nearly destroyed my family by ignoring red flags. Don't be like me. When someone doesn't feel right, they aren't. Here's what this true story taught me. Don't trust words. Trust actions. Lauren's promises were empty. Her intentions were poison. Don't ignore patterns. Every question revealed her agenda. Money, property, inheritance. I saw it. I just didn't act. Don't settle for silence. When Richard offered $900,000 to make it disappear, I said no, because truth is louder than hush money. This grandpa's story moment changed my family forever. But it didn't have to happen this way. If I had listened to my gut from day one, we could have prevented it all. My son Nathan became the hero of this true story because he acted on evidence. He did what I couldn't. This grandpa's story experience taught me one thing. Protect what matters before the threat becomes a crisis. Don't wait for justice to intervene through chaos. Listen to the whisper in your gut now. That's my grandpa's story warning for you. That's my true story lesson. My friends, that's the end of my story. But I want to hear from you. What part touched you the deepest? Have you ever ignored a gut feeling that later proved right? Please subscribe to the channel. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own warning signs, your own victories. Ask me anything about the recordings, the wedding day, or how we healed, and I'll answer every single one. Your stories matter to me. To hear the next true story, click the video on the left. Thank you for listening with your heart. See you in the comments. God bless you all.